Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We got another episode for you. We've been bringing them to you quite a bit in recent days. We had our post-game podcast on Saturday night after the loss to Northwestern. Of course, we had our emergency podcast on Sunday following the firing of James Franklin. And then Mark Brennan joined the conversation with us on Monday when we were fresh out of a press conference with both athletics director Pat Kraft and interim head coach Terry Smith. There was a lot to take away from those interactions. Obviously, a lot to digest based on where Penn State has gone here in the last 50 hours or so. And we have a lot for you waiting in that podcast from Monday if you missed it, and certainly from Sunday if you missed that one as well. We're going to turn the page forward a little bit here, talk about this matchup at Iowa. You got the Iowa City trip coming up on Saturday night. It looks like it might be a rainy, ugly kind of weather matchup, which isn't all that great for a first-time starting quarterback in Ethan Grunkemeyer. But we're going to dive into a lot on Iowa, what they have brought to the field, and we'll learn a little bit about what the Hawkeyes' perspective is on this Penn State team. You have to imagine they anticipated this would be a major opportunity to beat a projected national championship contender, and they're certainly getting a very much different version of these Nittany Lions than they anticipated coming to town, sputtering to town this Saturday. So stay tuned for that with David Eichholt, an insider for Iowa on our 24/7 Sports Network. But as promised early in the week, we got to get to Penn State recruiting because a lot has happened. A lot has happened since Sunday, since James Franklin was removed from the head coach position. Tyler Calvaruso has been all over it. We've been doing our coverage in a different way in terms of tracking the Penn State coaching search and doing a lot of post Franklin commentary over at Lions 24/7. And along the way, Tyler has been crushing it with recruiting in a pretty tough time in that department. So we appreciate the work he has put in. We're going to bring some of that to the podcast right now. Tyler, welcome back in. And this conversation is going to be a little bit different than you and I have ever had since you joined our team back in the summer of 2022.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had to have a conversation like this with anyone. I don't think I've ever covered no, Boston College. Steve does it. That was a little bit different though. There's a different feeling around this one. It's a tough. A lot of the recruits, the kids that have committed to Penn State in the 26 and 27 classes, they love James Franklin. They love this staff. So there's a human element of all this on the recruiting trail that I think some people lose in the mix of everything. But yeah, man, it's a lot is in flux right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's more questions hovering around Penn State recruiting than there ever have been during my time on the beat.
Well, we began this week with a lot of feedback on our feelings about James Franklin's dismissal and Pat Kraft's feelings about it. But I want to hear about you. You've covered this team now for a few recruiting cycles. You got a bit of a different perspective than many people because you're talking to parents and prospects who are seeing maybe a different side of James than we accustomed to. And additionally, you've had some interaction with James Franklin over the years. I think your first time on campus to cover a camp, you and I were invited to hop on his golf cart and ride around a bit on campus. And so you've had those interactions as well. Before we get into the details on recruiting, what's happened with the 26 class, what happens with the 2027 class, and maybe what comes next as the coaching search rolls on, what is your initial reaction to James Franklin no longer being the Nittany Lions leader?
On a personal level, it's odd. I think next time I'm up in State College, it's going to be odd not seeing James Franklin up there running a camp or giving his usual pre-camp speech to the parents. But from an on-field and recruiting perspective, I see both sides of the coin. I understand the crowd that says, hey, wait, can we realistically do better than what James Franklin has accomplished at Penn State? And I also understand what seems like the majority is it was time. I think that's more the side I lean on at this point. Sometimes you just reach that point in a head coach's tenure where it's best for all parties involved to move on and seek fresh opportunities. And look, I think for me, my two biggest things that I've taken away from this are Penn State is allowed to set their expectations where they want to set their expectations, right? Winning 10 games a year, making the college football playoff semifinals last year, that's all well and good, but the Penn State administration is allowed to shoot a little bit higher than that if that is what they desire, and that is what they have shown by moving on with James Franklin. And you never know what is going to happen because, look, Georgia has made a move like this, moving on from Mark Richt, bringing in Kirby Smart. You just don't know what is going to happen if you break through, make a move, bring in a guy who could get you to that next step. It could also go the opposite direction. We've seen programs that have been successful for years move on from a veteran head coach because they feel that they can take that next step and break through. That's where they have set their expectations. Mainly, when people had that conversation, they center on the Nebraska program after moving on from Bo Pelini. So I'm very much in wait and see. This is going to be a marathon when it comes to bringing in a new head coach. So we got to see, 1, who the hire is going to be, obviously. 2, the staff. 3, recruiting ties from my perspective. What can be accomplished on the recruiting trail under a new regime that hasn't been previously accomplished that could help to take this Penn State program to the next level? And frankly, I view it as a difficult question because throughout my tenure here, I felt that James Franklin and his staff have done a really good job on the recruiting trail. I think James Franklin built a staff littered with good recruiters. So there are just so many variables that go into a decision like this. I understand the crowd that thinks it was time. I understand the crowd that still thought Franklin maybe deserved a little bit more time, a little bit more leeway, however you want to put it. But now, the past is the past, right? The call has been made. Franklin's no longer the coach. Now it's about the future, especially on the recruiting trail. And Penn State has a lot of work cut out for it in that realm.
Yeah, Tyler, how many commits were on board for the 2026 class going into last weekend? Do you know roughly what that number was?
24.
Okay, now it's 1/3 of that, correct? 8 commits in the 2026 class.
So,
do I have that right?
It depends how you want to classify. This is something this is something that we've struggled with on our end as well, because throughout my entire career covering recruiting, anytime a kid says that they want to reopen their recruitment, they're decommitting. But in this situation, a lot of Penn State commits, they're staying committed, but they're exploring additional options beyond the Nittany Lions in their recruitments. So a lot of these guys are still committed. Take that for what you will, because right now, with just the overall uncertainty, the lack of stability, however you want to put it, these guys are speaking to other programs and they are exploring additional options.
We used to have a term for this, Tyler. It was soft commit. And I always hated the term. I never understood. This is probably an appropriate time to call it a soft commit, where you're kind of keeping your seat warm in the 2026 class because you may still want to be part of this program's future, but you naturally want to learn what's next for the program. And at the same time, the clock is ticking. In about 7 weeks, these guys are going to need final decisions. In about 10 weeks or 11 weeks, they're going to be on college campuses, many of them as early enrollees. So kind of a little bit opens the door for some speed dating with other programs.
Yeah, I actually forgot about that term. That's probably the best way to put it at this point, because you've had 3 hard decommitments post-Franklin firing. Hawkeyes, wide receiver from DeMatha in Maryland. Davion Brown, top 24/7 wideout from Virginia. And on Tuesday, Jazeel Hart, the cornerback out of Virginia as well. So 3 guys who they're officially out the door. They have decommitted. They'll entertain the new Penn State staff if a hire comes at a time where they can still do that, but they are no longer committed to the program. The rest of the group, again, fall into that soft commit category that you just mentioned, still committed. Speaking of other programs, and I'm sure our listeners are going to hear that and take that however they will when it comes to these kids aren't really committed and whatnot. And I get all of that because the situation is what it is. The timing of all of this, it makes this entire ordeal extremely complex because the early signing period begins December 3rd. These kids want to know, they at least want to gain some sort of sense of direction on where Penn State is taking things with this next head coach hire. They also need to figure out where they're going to be playing at the next level. Yeah, I'm sure some of them will wind up taking things into the second, but at the end of the day, it's knocking on the door. Kids can take as much time as they want, but if you're going to find a new school to play at, you've got to take visits. There's only so much time you can do that because there's only so much left on the college football calendar in the regular season. So the approach that is being taken by the large majority of Penn State's 26 commits, I think it's the mature approach. I think it's the business-like approach. And I think it's the approach that all of those kids need to be taking just because there is so much uncertainty. And it's a tough deal because it's like I said earlier, I think this is a really good recruiting staff. But Terry Smith and the remaining staffers, there's only so much they could do in a spot like this just because there's not a ton of clarity that could be provided right now. So, man, 26, it's a tough deal. It's not a deal I think anyone was really anticipating coming together to this point. You suffer decommitments every cycle. That's just the nature of recruiting. But a coaching change, that brings about a whole different set of circumstances.
Well, Tyler, I may have, I guess, gotten ahead of myself, but I went over to the 24/7 sports page and it says 8 hard commits, and 8 commits is what that it shows on the page. So I don't know if you're controlling that page or if someone else is going in. And when the guys announce that they're reopening their commitments or recruitments, that they're getting removed from that page. But if you go to our official site for 24/7 sports and go to that 2026 class, I'm only seeing 8 hard commits.
I'm actually seeing 22 on my end right now. So I'm looking at the page right now. I don't know what's going on, but but what I just said right now, what we just
discussed, what? I screwed this up, Tyler. I'm looking for some reason it categorized when I went to this page only Pennsylvania prospects.
Oh, okay.
There's 8 of them. Yeah, so that's my fault. I somehow ended up landing on the wrong page, and so yeah, it's getting scary, but it's not getting that scary, folks. They have more. It might more get in the that scary, but yeah, it could. It could. So let's talk about who's kind of in that 1 foot on the bandwagon, 1 foot off the bandwagon situation right now, and guys who have made it clear that I want to save my spot in this class, but I also want to explore their options. Give us the most important names that you think Penn State needs to retain with this new coaching staff, that Terry Smith and his current staff need to kind of make sure that they're not losing ground in that recruitment.
So I'll start with the 2 top 100 in-state commits, Matt Sieg and Kevin Brown. Sieg is exploring additional options. He's been hearing from other schools. Kevin Brown seems pretty comfortable waiting and seeing how things play out before diving into that. So of all of Penn State's commits in the 26 class, I mean, he's arguably the most important one you want to keep, depending on how you value his position, his upside. And he's very much in wait-and-see mode. He hasn't reached the point of exploring additional options as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to say he's comfortable with what's going on, but I think there is a desire to wait and see how this plays out for Penn State. Jackson Ford, similar deal. Troy Hume, top 24/7 quarterback commit. He's been pretty quiet. I think quarterback recruiting, that's a different world in itself. Hume has long believed in the vision that Danny O'Brien, quarterback's coach, has for him. At Penn State, has long believed for the vision the offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki has had for him at Penn State. He profiles and strikes me as wait-and-see mode as well right now. Terry Wiggins, 4-star linebacker, top 24/7 prospect, exploring additional options. Elijah Littlejohn, another top 24/7 linebacker. He's been quiet. Messiah Mickens, running back, he's been exploring additional options. Believe he's been hearing from 7 schools in specific that he might take visits to, whether those be unofficial or official. Beyond the 4 stars in the top 100s and the top 24/7s, large majority of this group has reached the point where they are exploring additional options. Alex Haskell is pretty okay with where things are at right now when it comes to exploring options. He's not really speaking to other programs. As far as I know, that could obviously change because there is just so much fluidity to the entirety of this situation. But you've seen Darryl Carey, same kind of deal. He's been speaking to Anthony Poindexter before getting to the point of speaking with other programs and exploring additional options. So you've kind of seen a rash of fresh offers come in for Penn State commits on social media. And that's really just where things are at right now. I wrote it on, I believe, Monday morning. I can't even keep track of the days at this point with all that's been going on. I believe it was Monday morning. But the Sharks, they're essentially circling. And for the first time in my time covering the program, probably one of the first times, even when Franklin had stability at Penn State, there's more going against Penn State on the trail than going for Penn State on the trail.
Yeah, and again, I apologize for scaring people with that number earlier, the low number. I had a wrong read on that, and I knew it wasn't right. I went and glanced at the page. I'm like 8, and I knew that wasn't the right number. I should have asked you.
You figured it out, man. You're good.
But honestly, if we were technically removing guys who are saying they are going to go visit other schools, they are listening to other schools, and we just stuck to guys who are either been quiet or have said I'm hard committed to this. The number's very low. It's a very low number right now. Let's talk about the 2027 class because I'm pretty sure I got this one right. It went from the top-ranked class in the country a couple weeks ago. Now there is no one committed to the 2027 class. Tell us who left and ultimately who is the most important member of that exodus that Penn State needs to circle back and get back on board once they have things stable again.
Yeah, you didn't even have to throw a number out there for me to know you were right because that class is now barren. It's empty, and it's kind of a shame because it was looking like a really, really good recruiting class for Penn State in the early days of the cycle. You had a 5-star in-state running back, Kimon Spell, on board. top 24/7 wide receiver Khalil Taylor from Pine Richland out in Western Pennsylvania on board. Gabe Jenkins, top 24/7 safety from Amani Christian Academy, a program that this Penn State staff fared really, really well at in the final years of Franklin's tenure as head coach. He's no longer on board. And top 100 offensive tackle Leighton Von Brandt. We've said multiple times about him throughout his recruitment that the only way he would not wind up at Penn State was if James Franklin wasn't the head coach. And, well, here we are. He's decommitted. So that 27 class completely out the door, and understandably so. Those guys don't have any real reason to take the approach that 26 commits are taking just because they are so far off from signing in their recruitments. Go out and explore as much as you possibly can, right? And a lot of these guys, come on, Spell, Khalil Taylor, really the entirety of the group, they're willing to reevaluate Penn State once a new head coach is named, once a new hire is made, and once the staff is announced. So it's not completely dead, but it's going to be tough to build back up, just given all the uncertainty that is currently in place. And it's a priority for Penn State to continue building for the future right now. There are still home games left. There's still going to be visitors. How much stock you place in those visitors right now is entirely up to you because, just again, the uncertainty of it. How many of these staffers that you see when you do make it to Penn State for this visit are going to be on campus with you throughout your collegiate career? It's a very fair thing for recruits in that 27 class to wonder right now. And the staff has an eye on it, but the priority, clear cut, no doubt about it, retention in the 26 class. That is the immediate priority for this staff. Anything that happens in 27 that winds up being positive from this point on is probably window dressing until a new staff gets announced. But 26, that's the priority. And Terry Smith and his staff, I'll tell you this, they're working very, very hard to keep this group intact. Very, very hard. I don't know where that's going to lead them at the end of the day, but they're putting in the work.
It's not an easy thing for these guys, these position coaches, these recruiting coordinators, the recruiting assistants who do all the grunt work, because let's be honest, in the back of their mind, they have a paycheck to earn right now. They have an obligation professionally. They should have pride, like a lot of what Terry Smith said about the way this team needs to perform the next 6 weeks and the way they need to coach. They need to do their jobs. But in the back of your mind, you got to be wondering, what are the chances I'm actually going to be around to see these kids grow up on campus if they actually get to this campus? And how much of my energy right now in a really tough time am I going to expend on making sure they make it here if I'm not going to be part of that future? And so it's human nature, I think, to think that, because whether these guys end up, maybe some guys end up following Franklin to wherever he lands next, or some of these guys end up just needing to be scattered across the country with their families. And that's the kind of the football life here. We haven't seen it play out in Happy Valley much because it's been a long time since they had a coaching change, but that's the reality right now that a lot of these guys are facing. And that's just something they'll have to overcome for the time being. And when we look at this 2027 class, Pat Kraft had a pretty candid answer about this group, at least. He said, quote, "I'm less worried about 27 kids and more worried about my kids in the locker room. I'm just going to be very honest." That's what he said about that. And I think that was kind of being like, there's a risk you run when you fire James Franklin. And I think he understood that. He said none of this is surprising, seeing players waver on their commitments or players back away from their commitments. But his main message was he had to look out for the players who are currently on campus and what they want to build toward the future. That's obviously going to entail recruiting. And so with that in mind, Tyler, what happens next and what needs to happen next? This is a Terry Smith-led team right now. And I think if you talk about position coaches who are most likely to be with this program in 2026, Terry Smith's probably on the top of that list, if you're asking me. I don't know that there'll be a lot of position coaches retained on the staff. That's ultimately going to be up to the new head coach and his conversations with Pat Kraft. But whoever does take over this program, and I know we got Terry Smith in the conversation because Pat Kraft made sure he put him there. But let's assume it's an outsider who comes here, isn't from within the community right now. What do they have to do? What is the first priority? Because they're going to have a short launch pad between their hiring and when they have to sign these players in the winter and bring them to campus as freshmen. So what, in your opinion, does this person need to do hitting the ground running from a recruiting standpoint?
First things first, you got to go into these homes of these kids who are still committed by the time you're hired and get parents, get players to trust you. That's the biggest thing. You have to build up a level of trust, because here's the reality of the situation. Any coach that comes in and any commit that sticks around and decides to play for that coach, they're going to be taking a leap of faith No matter how spotless their track record may be at their previous program, you are still taking a leap of faith because your relationship with this coach, more likely than not, is fresh. I understand you might have a relationship with whoever winds up being hired from at a different point in your recruitment, but that was then and this is now. It's a different set of circumstances, and that coach will be leading a different program than the one that he previously recruited you to play for. If you do have that pre-existing relationship, that pre-existing relationship is not even going to be present in a lot of situations. So whoever the next Penn State head coach is going to be, he has to go into these homes and build trust as quickly as he possibly can and sell a vision in the most impactful way he possibly can. And it's frankly, it's an unenviable task in such a short time frame. It is. And that's why if you have to take your lumps when it comes to 26 retainment and building a 26 class, that might just come as part of this entire situation. You could go heavy in the portal if that happens. You could place even more emphasis on building a really strong 27 class if that happens. There are long-term workarounds and there's a long-term path to success, even if the group that you quote-unquote inherited decides to go elsewhere. And it's going to be tough to hang on a lot of these kids for whoever the next Penn State head coach is. But that's what they have to do. They have to get in there quick. They got to build those relationships on the fly, earn trust, sell the vision in a way that truly resonates with recruits and parents. And there's also an NIL aspect of this as well, right? We got to be very frank about that. We'll see where things stand on that front. But there's also a personal aspect of this as well. And when it comes to keeping some of these guys, that personal aspect and personal relationship and trust might supersede dollars and cents because you're going to be sending your kid off to play for a coach that you just met in a lot of instances. And there's one other thing I want to say as well. You mentioned Terry Smith. This is the decision that goes way, way, way above my pay grade. I think whoever the next Penn State head coach is needs to prioritize retaining Terry Smith specifically. And here's why. His recruiting success in recent years speaks for itself. It's undeniable. The ties that he has built up throughout Pennsylvania and even beyond the recruiting footprint in the Northeast. Terry Smith is a big reason why a guy like Darius Dixon, who's been lauded since the moment he stepped on campus, even gave the Nittany Lions a look being from California, playing at Modern Day. Smith does such a good job on the relationship front and not just the developmental front as well from an on-field perspective, but getting these kids to buy in as recruits. He bleeds Penn State. He knows the area. He's experienced. He's got a charismatic personality. There are a lot of really good recruiters on the staff. Like I said, Deion Barnes looks like an up-and-comer in this industry. Ty Howell has consistently succeeded on the recruiting trail. Dan Connor, the jury's still out just because it's his first year, but he brought in a really good trio in 26, and look like the arrow was pointing up for him as well. Anthony Poindexter, I don't even have to get into him because every Penn State fan knows his worth from an on-field and recruiting perspective. He's very good at what he does, and I think he still has future defensive coordinator at some program written all over him. But Terry Smith can carry so much value for a new head coach, especially if it's someone who hails from outside of the region and just does not have a lot of long-standing ties in the region. I think he could provide immense value to whoever the next Penn State head coach is.
So the other flip side of that is we talked about scrambling to keep who's already on board, but I'm reminded of when James Franklin took over this program in January of 2014. A lot of guys followed him from his Vanderbilt class. It was a significant chunk, and you may recognize the names Trace McSorley, big-time starting quarterback here for Penn State, several years, a lot of success, Big Ten champion. He came from that Vanderbilt class. And then Grant Haley, who delivered one of the more memorable plays of the Franklin era, the scoop and score touchdown against Ohio State, was a starting cornerback here. He was committed to James Franklin at Vanderbilt. It's a longer list than that, but those two guys come to mind that would be most relevant for our audience probably. So, Tyler, how much is that? I mean, outside of bringing in a guy from the NFL or someone who's currently not coaching, you're going to hire someone who currently has his own recruiting class that he spent years assembling. So how much is that going to be part of the process and seeing what you can kind of have follow him? And let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. It's going to have to be an aggressive transfer portal strategy this year. You're going to have exodus from this program because you got James Franklin's guys. You've got position coaches that got to be moving on. You're going to have a lot of departures from this current roster for one reason or the other. And then you're going to have to hit the portal hard to fill some holes, maybe bring in some star talent. sounds like they're ready to spend some money in the portal. And so how much is that going to be important to kind of, I guess, stabilize this class, get it to the finish line looking pretty solid by supplementing it with whoever your head coach has already gained commitments from on a different campus?
Yeah, it'll definitely factor into stabilizing things and ensuring that the 2026 roster is as strong as it could possibly be. I anticipate whoever Penn State goes with as its next head coach, like you said, there are going to be some guys who tag along because you see it every year, every destination, almost every destination. It's just part of the business. And though I talked about relationships just now, just went on that whole tangent. Those are guys who have relationships with Penn State's incoming head coach. So you're going to have that working in your favor. There's also the fact that, like you said, it seems like there's going to be a little bit more money to throw around in the portal. I think that in this day and age in college football, you can rebuild on the fly more than you ever previously could. Now, does that mean year one is instant success? I'm not going to go and say that because we don't even know who the hire is yet. But the other part of it for me is if you could put together a solid team for 26, whether it be through your 26 recruiting class, whoever you're able to hang on to or bring in from your previous stop, and whoever you can land in the portal, that 26 schedule is very manageable for a first-year head coach. It is. So maybe that can help Penn State jumpstart this new regime. But from a recruiting perspective, you're definitely going to see some guys, because, again, it is what happens every single cycle, follow the next Penn State head coach from their previous stop. Now, what do those guys bring to the table? We don't know who those guys are yet, so we can't say. But odds are, given some of the names that you guys have done an excellent job covering as potential candidates, guys who are elsewhere right now, there are some talented recruits in those classes. And if those guys follow, it could help right away.
We'll have a lot of coverage for you on the recruiting angle, on the coaching search angle. And, oh, by the way, we're still covering a team that's only at mid-season right now. We got 6 more games to cover at least here in 2025. So a lot going on at Lions247.com. I mentioned it earlier, 60% off sale going on right now. We thought it would be a good time to bring in some new subscribers. There have been a lot who have joined in the last few days, a ton of new subscribers. I'm told that, we got a bunch coming in on Wednesday already, and we're not even to noon yet. So great stuff. Welcome to our new subscribers. If you haven't jumped on board yet, check it out. You're going to want to bookmark that coaching search page for our hot board. We got about 500,000 views on that thing right now, and there's a lot of people chiming in who I would call our board insiders. We don't necessarily know what their names are, but they tend to have intel, and we're working our best. I've been working the phones locally, nationally, with the agent world and the coaching world, and trying to put some pieces together on who is legitimate in play, who is maybe not so legitimate in play for Penn State. And that's a day-to-day process that changes seemingly. So a lot to keep up with. We'll do our best. And Tyler, always appreciate your perspective. We're going to hop over to Iowa in just a moment, learn more about Penn State's next opponent. But good stuff, as always, from you during a pretty tough time on the recruiting trail.
Thanks, man. Keep it rolling on your end, too.
This episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast continues with focus on Penn State's next opponent. We have a ton to learn about the Nittany Lions, that's for sure. New starting quarterback, new interim head coach. What adjustments might we see made on the field on Saturday? That's a big topic of discussion. We'll dive into that on our next episode as we preview this matchup from a Penn State perspective, give you our predictions. And by then, we'll get a chance to go over to the practice field. Just for full clarity here, we are not going to actually see practice action this week. The Nittany Lions schedule was disrupted by James Franklin's firing Sunday. They typically hit the field on Sunday. That did not happen on this occasion. They always have Monday as an off day. So got back to work on Tuesday, and based on how things are going for the schedule, we're not going to get our typical 15-minute window on Wednesday. That'll resume next week, but we will hear from Terry Smith after practice, and so another chance to pick the brain of the new leader for the Nittany Lions. Just putting that out there, though. No practice updates coming for you on Wednesday, but we'll give you what we can after leaving Penn State's team facilities on Wednesday evening, and we'll bring it to you in podcast form with Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. But shifting attention towards the Iowa Hawkeyes, it's always been a fun matchup. I mean, there have been some remarkable, memorable games in Iowa City, here in State College, between these two programs. Of course, Kirk Ferentz, the most consistent presence in the Big Ten, really across college football at this point. He has a longer shelf life than everybody, including James Franklin, as it turns out. And we're going to break down that squad, as we always do, with David Eichholt, who joins us right now on the Lions 24/7 podcast. If you've followed our podcast for years, you're familiar with David's work covering Iowa. He comes on and joins us before each one of these matchups. Great conversation. One of my favorite beat reporters within the 24/7 sports structure. So always appreciate David. I know I'm hopping on your podcast this week as well. So the collaboration in full effect. And we got a lot to get into on this one.
Dude, I was going to say, I'm busy this week with both men's and women's basketball media day. And then, of course, once everything happens Sunday, I just told you off air, I'm like, I can't really complain about how busy we are this week. You guys are going through a cluster. And definitely, I think, one of the most interesting stories across college football right now. I don't envy you, but, of course, there's a lot of opportunity for good content for your subscribers, too. But I always appreciate you talking to you, man.
Yeah, man, we're getting to work. We're not getting much sleep the first few days of things here, but we'll see how things settle in. And there's a game. We have to keep reminding ourselves there's a game this Saturday for this program. And I want to start before we dive into Iowa and their path to this point and some of the players that are doing good things and some of the potential strengths and weaknesses with you. I want to talk about what the perception looks like in Iowa City on this matchup, because I'd imagine 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was being viewed as a chance to topple a top 10 team, make a big statement in the Big Ten and knock off Penn State. And now you got no James Franklin. You got no Drew Aller. You got a 3-game losing streak for the Nittany Lions, their first losing streak since 2021. So how are people viewing this as Penn State prepares to head to town?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if you are familiar with Iowa right now, I think they've lost 11 straight games to ranked opponents. So this was kind of like the prime opportunity to where Iowa could finally break free of that spell, right? Penn State coming into Kinnick Stadium at night. We've all seen the story before on both sides of the equation. Of course, everybody remembers the infamous punt into the stands and everything that kind of ensued after that. I think people are still really excited. And this is what I keep continuing to tell people. Obviously, it matters who the head coach is. Obviously, Drew Aller's out. But Penn State's still one of the biggest brands in college football. It's never a bad thing to beat one of the biggest brands in college football, especially to kind of continue to right the ship, because Iowa's schedule is only going to get more difficult as they finally go down the pipeline of things. I mean, Iowa's going to welcome in Oregon in a couple weeks, right? Then they have a bye week. Then they go on the road to USC. So this is kind of like that first big opportunity against another big brand in college football to say, hey, look, Iowa can kind of begin to turn the page and get toward that 8 to 9 win season. And if you do that with their schedule and kind of what the expectations were, I think you're taking it. So I think people are still really excited about it. The game finally did sell out on Monday. It's a night game in Kinnick Stadium. They've been kind of waiting for one of those big, infamous night games inside Kinnick Stadium again. It's Penn State. It's one of the most respected, biggest brands in college football. I don't think any opportunity that people are overlooking against a program like that, I don't know why they're watching college football, quite frankly, and why they're a fan of the team that they are, right? So, of course, I think the narrative has shifted. Like, if you would have told me 3 weeks to a month ago, Tyler, that Iowa was going to be favored by 3 to 3.5 points and Penn State would be unranked, I don't know what reality I would have told you or what I thought you would have been on or how drunk you were. But alas, here we are, and this is why the games are played, right? So it'll definitely be a lot of fun. But, of course, I think the weather – I'm very curious how the weather is going to impact things, because I did see it's supposed to storm. But it's going to be a fun matchup. I think people are excited about it still.
Let's talk about the path that Iowa has taken through the first half of this season. They're sitting at 4-2. Their non-conference schedule featured a win over Albany, a win over UMass, and then they lost by 3 points to in-state foe Iowa State. In Big Ten play, a win over Rutgers by 10, a big win over Wisconsin last week on the road, 37-0, as that Luke Fickell era seems to be nearing the exit door. And then against Indiana, a team that everyone's talking about right now, number 3 in the country, unbeaten, certainly seems primed to duplicate their playoff run from last year, their opportunity to get to the postseason. But back on September 27th, this Iowa team was leading Indiana in the fourth quarter. It ended up being a victory for the Hoosiers, 20-15. But David, what have you learned about Iowa through these 6 games? And can you maybe talk us through how that Indiana matchup went? Because clearly that's their biggest litmus test thus far against high caliber opponent.
Yeah, I mean, we always hate the what-if game, right, when we're analyzing stuff. But remember, Mark Gronowski did exit the game with about 10 minutes to go in that Indiana game while it was tied. At the same time, Iowa missed numerous opportunities where they could have taken the lead or secured it. Drew Stevens, who is only 2 field goals away from being Iowa's all-time field goal leader, missed a quite frankly, a chip shot for him. I mean, he has the leg to hit from 65 to 70 yards, Tyler. Like, his leg is ridiculous. But he missed the field goal. There was a 3rd and 5. With about 2.5 minutes to go. Iowa tried to run a screenplay. Iowa backup Hank Brown, the Auburn transfer, just had an uncharacteristic, awful throw, missed a wide open screen. And if you would have saw the setup, He probably gets the first down, right? Then Iowa runs down the clock. Do they kick the field goal to win it? Indiana got the ball back. Iowa's like facing a 3rd and 10 from around their own 45. Iowa brought a double safety blitz, which had been successful throughout most of the game. Mendoza read it, got Sarah on a one-on-one. Nobody in the backfield to catch him. Touchdown. And I think everybody kind of knew in Kinnick Stadium that the game was over just because they hadn't seen enough of Hank Brown. Iowa's passing game has still been a work in progress. And that's going to be a big story even heading into this Penn State game, Tyler. Like, how healthy is Mark Gronowski? He played last week against Wisconsin. He was kind of hesitant running the football. We got the chance to talk to him yesterday. He said he continues to feel better. His knee continues to feel better. But, he had some problems decelerating. And if you're a running quarterback, it's kind of a big deal. But I will say, I think Mark Gronowski is probably Iowa's most athletic quarterback since Brad Banks, who finished runner-up to the Heisman. Gronowski only has
that's
2
a name right
touchdowns.
there. That's a name right there. Right. The young guys might not know that name, but that's a name right there. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's got 8 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's been unbelievable just in terms of expanding Iowa's offense. I think the narrative of Iowa's offense should probably start to turn the page. I don't think it's completely solved. The passing game is still kind of working its way up, but I think Wisconsin's kind of the new Iowa. When you look at their quarterback, I think they're averaging 6.7 points in Big Ten play right now, Tyler. I think their team total against Ohio State, 7.5. But Mark Gronowski is a guy where, like, again, if he's healthy, I think he could be a big impact player. But if he's only 80% and they aren't running quarterback runs like they have this season, how much does Penn State just kind of pin their ears back and try to get after Gronowski if they try to make him a pocket passer? It's definitely something to watch. I think if the Wisconsin game had taken place immediately after the Indiana game, he would not have played. So, again, I do think that's noteworthy. But Iowa's a team where, I hate to say it, they're probably 3 or 4 plays away from being undefeated at this point, but that's why you have to win in between the margins. I think Iowa State deserved that win, that one. And of course, it's almost the same thing as like Penn State against Iowa in 2021, right? Everybody always talks about that. I know I brought it up. Penn State fans probably weren't happy with my opinion at the time, but like, if Sean Clifford hadn't gotten hurt, right? Does the train stay on the track? Do they end up beating Iowa? There's certainly a case for that. And that's kind of the same opinion as like if Mark Gronowski stays healthy against Indiana, do they beat Indiana? But it'll be interesting to see. I don't think Iowa's defense is as elite as it's been in past years. I don't think the special teams is anywhere near as elite, but the offense is actually serviceable, especially when you look at their offensive front.
I want to talk about Gronowski because you've covered some terrible offense. I mean, you, of everyone in our 24/7 Sports Network, I don't know if you've covered as rough of a patch of offensive play as you did for several years there. You were pretty vocal in your thoughts on Brian Ferentz as things kind of went down to the wire with that experience, and understandably so. And Gronowski is a guy that, if people are unfamiliar, has a really interesting background. He had one Division I scholarship offer. That was with South Dakota State, where he ended up winning multiple national championships at the FCS level. He essentially won the Heisman Trophy, the version of that at the FCS level, MVP game of championship games. This September, he became the all-time winningest quarterback at the Division I level of college football. 52 total victories, I believe that is. If I'm off, he's somewhere around there. Tell me how the offense looks different with him at quarterback, what you're seeing differently, because his stats don't pop out at you. I mean, 3 touchdown passes on the season, if I'm not mistaken. But what is he doing maybe to orchestrate this offense that looks different than in years past? And how are they dealing with the run game? Because I know Caleb Johnson was a really special player, a guy that had 1,500 yards on the ground last year, 21 touchdowns. He moves on to the NFL. So what does the supporting cast look like beyond Gronowski?
Yeah, so you're right. Gronowski has an interesting background. And if you go to his game against Albany, Tyler, everybody was freaking out because I think he only ended with like 44 passing yards. And again, it was not good, okay? A couple things to keep in mind. One, he did not work with Iowa in the spring. He was recovering from an optional surgery that allowed his shoulder to get healthy. He played through it all last year, decided to get it. Let's not act like Iowa's wide receivers are known as world beaters. Everybody always blames Spencer Petras. And again, there obviously were quarterback issues, but the skill position-wise, Iowa's not been good enough. I do think the wide receiver play is probably as good as it's been in the last few years. They did get Reese Vanderzee back, 6'4", very athletic guy. He's going to be the number one target for Gronowski. Those two had great chemistry throughout fall camp. We heard a lot of really good things about it. Sam Phillips a Chattanooga transfer. Had 0 drops last year, only 1 this year. 5'6" to 5'7" on a good day, but he's got a lot of speed out of that area as well. And then they have a couple other options like Jacob Gill. The one big thing about this offense, I do think it's missing that would really help Gronowski. It's not tight end you right now. As crazy as this say, it still is when you look at the NFL production, right? Like Noah Fant with the Bengals, obviously George Kittle, TJ Hawkins, and like the list goes on. Sam Laporta, list goes on and on. Iowa is missing Aston Estranga, who suffered a torn Achilles earlier in the year, so their number 1 tight end's gone. I think they have guys waiting in the wings, but like they don't have that go-to security blanket at tight end. Now, I think Iowa's offensive line is as good as it's been in over a decade, at least, maybe even more. Like Logan Jones is one of the best centers in college football. Jennings Dunker at right tackle is poised to probably be a second-round draft pick. Trevor Laux had a big year as well. I have not looked at the updated stats, but 2 weeks ago, Tyler, if you looked at Pro Football Focus in the positional rankings, every single Iowa starter was either number 1 or number 2 in the country by Pro Football Focus. So they're able to open up a lot of different things on the ground. Iowa has had running back health issues, but Kamari Moulton's looking like a guy who's an every down back. Xavier Williams is a big-bodied redshirt freshman who had 2 touchdowns last week. He has some explosiveness. And you want another name pull, Tyler? He's got some early signs of Sean Green. Like he's very similarly built, has a nice jump cut, is not afraid to run over a guy. The potential's there. And I think he has a little bit better hands than Sean Green because, Sean Green could not catch anything whatsoever, but kind of didn't need to when you have 1,750 yards. And then they have a couple other options as well in Jazz Patterson, TJ Washington, but it does sound like that they are going to miss the game against Penn State. And then keep an eye out on true freshman Nathan McNeil. He's another guy that just has great maturity with his run, has had a handful of big runs. So, again, no running back stats really pop out at you as all-conference caliber, Tyler, but that's probably because of all the injury situations. But they have a variety of guys. The offensive line's been stellar. But outside of that, like that probably gives you a little bit of an indication as to why Gronowski's passing touchdowns aren't where they need to be because, quite frankly, again, it's not good enough. But when you have a quarterback who's also giving you 8 touchdowns on the ground and Iowa's still averaging 30 points in conference play, you really can't complain too much. But it's definitely not your – I wouldn't even say not your father's Iowa offense. It's not your, like, older brother Iowa offense, right? Like, even just a few years removed, I think Tim Lester's done a terrific job. And for people who also don't know, I think he took over the worst quarterback room in the country when Lester got there over a year ago, right? There was no quarterback on that original roster that Tim Lester inherited that returned for a second year. He completely cleared house and completely transformed the quarterback room. So again, it's still similar concepts to a degree, a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of focusing on the ground, but they will take a deep shot or two and go for a kill shot if Lester feels like the opportunity presents itself.
When you look at this defense, that has been where Iowa has long been able to hang its hat. When they've struggled to score points, the defense have kept them in a lot of matchups over the years. They have given up 20 points and 16 points respectively in those 2 losses. So hard to blame the defense for what went down in the 2 defeats this year. What is the overall picture you can paint for us on defense and kind of the projected strengths and possible weaknesses going into this Penn State matchup?
Yeah, I mean, the linebacker play is, I think, the first weakness. Iowa's had probably the gold standard of Mike linebackers over the past few years. I mean, you think of Jay Higgins, who was unbelievable, not overly athletic, but that's a guy that just understood what play was happening before it even happened. And that's why he was able to kind of overcome his athletic deficiencies and also why he's on the Baltimore Ravens now. Not starting, but you make that Ravens roster, you're doing pretty well. And then, of course, Jack Campbell, right? But Iowa at Mike linebacker this year, I think that, I think there's a drop-off in athleticism. I think a lot of the guys understand what's happening. I think they're a step slow. Starting Mike linebacker Jaden Harrell is likely not to go, so it's going to be Jaden Montgomery making his second career start as a fifth-year guy, son of Jerry Montgomery, the former Green Bay Packer defensive line. I mean, he's only about 5'10" on a good day at Mike linebacker. Can really deliver some nice pressure when Iowa decides to blitz, but I do think linebacker play is probably Iowa's weakest point. But then you also look at the defensive line. I think that's Iowa's strength. Max Llewellyn's got 6 sacks on the year. His spin move, his swim move has been terrific off the edge. Aaron Graves, who almost had a fat guy touchdown last weekend, which everybody loves a good fat guy touchdown, read a screen. He did get tackled by the quarterback at the half-yard line teammates bullied him afterwards about it. But that's a guy who had an Iowa scholarship at 14, ended his recruitment in 3 minutes when he asked Kirk Ferentz, hey, how do I commit? And he said, just tell me. He said, okay, I'm committed, and shut down his recruitment right after that. But he's Iowa's kind of anchor in the middle. Then Ethan Hurkett on the edge, 6th-year guy as well. Bryce Hawthorne had an interception last week. 2 defensive linemen had interceptions last week against Wisconsin. And then I think Iowa's safety play has kind of been hit or miss. Xavier Wampa, who's one of the most highly touted safeties in his respective class, probably has not lived up to expectations. He delivers some hard hits, has not had that interception kind of turnover-worthy plays that people thought, maybe a step slow at times. Cohen Entringer has been terrific. But the guy I would say to keep a really close eye on is number 1 cornerback TJ Hall. He's a guy who I had a lot of questions on entering the year. Iowa's defenses are best when they have kind of that true lockdown cornerback one. You think about Josh Jackson, Desmond King, right? Think about Cooper DeJean, obviously. I did not think TJ Hall was going to be able to take that next step. He has no interceptions on the year, but he's got 9 pass breakups. He's really been holding down that side, and I think covering up some other weaknesses with Iowa's defense. But look for him to have another big game. But if I'm looking at Penn State to attack Deshaun Lee, Iowa's cornerback too, because TJ Hall has been so consistent on that side of the field, Tyler, a lot of teams have gone after Deshaun Lee, especially when he's left alone on island. Kind of an undersized corner, can make some good play on the ball, really good tackler in open space. But I think he struggles against bigger body receivers. So that's definitely going to be the matchup I watch. So not your top 5 Iowa defense. I would say probably top 15, maybe top 20 at worst. Like, there's still a really good defense, but it's not quite that standard that Iowa and Phil Parker has set throughout the past, decade of college football, maybe even more than that.
Yeah, and of course they're preparing for a quarterback who I think has about a dozen career passes, and we haven't seen much of him here at Penn State. There was a good line. I think you may have asked the question to Kirk at the press conference. What do you know about this quarterback? And he just said not much, and we don't either. So that's a pretty good answer. Ethan Grunkemeyer taking center stage a little bit on Saturday. You've mentioned a linebacker being probably sidelined by an injury. You talked about that with running back depth. Are there any other medical situations that we should be aware of heading into the kickoff?
Yeah, like I said, the running backs, and then of course, Jaden Harrell's out, and then Asin Estranga, the tight end. He's been out for a few games, but that he's been out. Other than that, I don't think so. I know Iowa's cornerback 3 is likely to miss another game, and Shaheed Barrows, the South Dakota transfer. But other than that, Iowa's finally had some good luck in terms of the injury front. It was interesting before the season. Kirk talked about this is the healthiest he's ever been leaving fall camp. And Reese Vanderzee, Iowa's wide receiver 1, Tyler, I'm not kidding you when I tell you this. He broke a bone in his foot walking upstairs to go get food from Iowa's athletic training table. Just a complete freak thing. And that was kind of the downward spiral of, okay, things are really starting to happen. Then in Iowa's first game, Iowa's depth piece at guard, Bryce George from Ferris State, he dislocated his elbow in warmups. Something that has never happened. It was just the craziest thing. And after that, it's kind of been a slow downhill spiral. But Kamari Moulton's missed time this year with injury. Iowa's starting running back. Xavier Williams came back last week. All of Iowa's top 4 running backs have missed time this year. So again, they're getting 2 of the 4 back, but I still think that's kind of worth noting, especially with how fresh off injury they are. But other than that, and Mark Gronowski, of course, I'm not sold that he's going to be 100%. I'm leaning toward 80 to 85. But if he's 80 to 85, how much is he going to run? Because there are even times where they faced a 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5 against Wisconsin. He hesitated, and he's not the guy who hesitates very often. So if that happens, I think there are a couple playmakers on Penn State to where you can't second guess. You got to be able to go, right? Otherwise, they're going to make you pay.
Yeah. Just like I mentioned at offense with the new quarterback, we don't know quite where this defense is right now. They have really slipped the last couple of weeks, given up a lot of long possessions, giving up points and really tough times when the offense kind of shows signs of life. The defense lets them down. And so not complimentary football. Jim Knowles will see if his unit can take a step forward against Iowa on Saturday night. You mentioned it, night game at Kinnick Stadium, Penn State, Iowa. There's a lot of history there. Of course, my mind goes back to the walk-off touchdown for Trace McSorley to Juwan Johnson in 2017, one of the premier games for Saquon Barkley in his college career. Think back to 2021, Penn State's rolling in that game. They're unbeaten on the season. You alluded to this. Sean Clifford gets hurt. Taquan Roberson comes in. It's probably the worst stretch of offensive play maybe we've seen from Penn State the rest of that game. And so, David, I'm curious where you stand on this one as of midweek. Iowa wins this if, Iowa loses this game if, and ultimately, where do you come down on a score prediction?
I mean, Iowa wins, I think, if they run the football effectively. Like that's been the big thing with Penn State. Like their rush defense has really slipped, and Iowa's offensive front has been flat out dominating teams this year. Like even against Indiana, Iowa was able to at least somewhat run the football against them to give themselves a chance, right? And again, I think Iowa has a plethora of backs. They have a really good offensive front. If they average 4.5 yards to 5 yards a carry, Iowa's going to win this game, right? Iowa's going to lose if they're forced to throw the football deep downfield or if they're forced to get in a two-man offense. If you look back at that Iowa State game, the announcer, I wish I remember the announcer, I'd give him credit. He summed it up best. He's like, Iowa's not comfortable in a two-man offense. And I couldn't tell you the last time Iowa went down the field in two-man offense and scored a touchdown, right? Like that's just not Iowa football. That's not the way they like to operate. They like to run the football. They don't like to get these little quick outs. They don't like to do these they don't like doing a lot of that stuff. So I think if you force Iowa into a two-man offense, if Penn State's defense shows up, rattles Gronowski, especially if Gronowski is not able to run, I think that can play a big factor. I'm probably leaning Iowa a little bit. I don't think Iowa's going to be able to – I don't think Iowa's overlooking Penn State, which, again, sounds insane that I'm even having to say that, but just given everything that's happened. Kirk Ferentz made it very clear during his press conference how much respect he has for the coordinators of Penn State. Said they have 3 excellent coordinators they're all familiar with. I'm probably giving Iowa a 3-point win. I think Drew Stevens will have a couple field goals. I think Iowa's going to be able to run the football out. I think it gets to the fourth quarter. There's 4.5 minutes to go. Penn State needs to stop. And Iowa just runs the football, and Penn State runs out of timeout. So I can see myself flipping back. It's just such an interesting time. Like, it's so hard for me to get grasp on this game because I'm familiar enough with Grunkmeyer's rise in the rankings throughout his senior year. The kid's got a lot of talent. This is an unfair first game for him to have to go in as far as starting. It was the same thing as like Taquan Roberson, right? That's not a fair situation for him to have to walk into. And I'd even say the same thing as Hank Brown when he had to go enter the game with 10 minutes to go against Indiana for his first significant action as a Hawkeye. These are not fair circumstances. But if Singleton and Allen show up for Penn State and they run the football effectively and they get back to what I think is one of the best 1-2 running back duos in America, Iowa could face some problems because I do think that there are some defensive question marks. So long answer, I'm leaning Iowa, but like if you ask me tomorrow or Friday when we put out our prediction, don't be surprised if I put Penn State.
All right, we'll stay tuned for that. David, always appreciate it. I'll return the favor. I'll get on your podcast this week as well. But thanks for hopping on, breaking down the Hawkeyes, and we'll see how it plays on Saturday night.
All right, man. Always appreciate you.
Good stuff, as always, from David Eichholt within our 24/7 Sports Network. Before him, you heard from Tyler Calvaruso breaking down the latest in what has become a whirlwind recruiting situation for the Nittany Lions after James Franklin's firing. We'll come back to you with another episode on Thursday. Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen will join me to preview this matchup from a Penn State perspective. We'll tell you what we learned from Terry Smith, the interim head coach, after our visit to the team facilities on Wednesday evening, and we'll give you our score predictions for Saturday's matchup. For now, head on over to Lions247.com for the latest in the coaching search, team development, recruiting action, and much more. 60% off right now gets you VIP access. I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening or watching to the Lions 24/7 podcast.